And thanks to all of you for joining us. If this is your first webinar with Rotor Consulting, we hope you'll join us every month on the second Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. Eastern for our free global webinars. And if you've been with us in the past, welcome back. It's great to see you again. Today's webinar sponsor is Twin Suns. If your company has several locations, your project management challenges are multiplied. You've considered cloud-based solutions, but where to start? Twin Suns are the experts in cloud workflow app development. Using QuickBase, the most reliable online data manager, Twin Suns delivers highly effective business solutions to Fortune 100 companies and startups alike. And solutions are in place in days or weeks, not months. For all your cloud-based business solutions, put your trust in Twin Suns. You can reach Twin Suns at 720-209-3385. You see that phone number at the bottom of your screen. You can also visit their website, Twin Suns Solutions. There's two S's in the middle there. Be sure to capture that. TwinSunsSolutions.com. And if you reach out to Twin Suns, send a personal hello to the president, Richard Crum, and send some good energy your way as well. He was riding his motorcycle a couple weeks ago, and someone else bumped into him, and he injured his foot. So send some good energy towards Rich's way, and if you reach out and call him, let him know that you hope he's certainly feeling better. So thank you, Twin Suns, for sponsoring all the webinars so far this year. We do appreciate it and the help that you've provided to help us keep these webinars free. Last month, we talked about innovation in project management. And as we do after all of our webinars, we go to the Rotor Consulting LinkedIn group and continue the conversation. Well, one of the questions that came up a month ago was the following. What do you do when executive stakeholders push for work to begin before the requirements are complete? If you've been managing projects for more than a couple months, you've probably had this experience where executive stakeholders push for the work to begin before requirements are complete. Well, this particular discussion stream has been quite active, and I'd like to share with you just a few of the many comments that we've received. Kiwi, who's a project manager in Afghanistan, states the following. I'm responsible for the budget, schedule, and quality, but I'm harassed by changes resulting from decisions on a whim from executives without going through proper change control, or I'm having to submit too many change requests because they're pushing for projects to begin early because the client has been promised an unrealistic finish date. Kiwi, I think we can all relate to you. Mary Grace from Milwaukee shares some advice on how to handle the situation. Mary Grace says, the initial project plan needs to call out specific milestones at which learning about requirements are integrated and the timeline and budget are recast with the project sponsors. Mary Grace goes on to say, this is a necessary evil when you're truly developing something new. Greg from Toronto offers a different perspective, and some others in the discussion have echoed this perspective as well. In fact, just as recently in the last 48 hours, we've had several posts to this. So this discussion continues to go on 1 month later. Well, Greg says, this is something that should be embraced by the project manager. Following more of an agile approach, in fact, will help formulate some of those requirements even better. I am with executive stakeholders on this one. So where do you stand? Do you see this as a good thing? The executive stakeholders are pushing for project success and pushing for work to begin even when things aren't certain, and how often are things certain? Or is this a hindrance and a hassle, such as some of the other words that we've heard? We'd love to hear what you have to say about this. I invite you to join the Rotor Consulting LinkedIn group. With over 3,500 members, it is the largest LinkedIn community of any online project management training company. We also invite you to join us on Facebook, view our videos on YouTube, and join us on Twitter. In fact, if you are a Twitter person, you can get active right now. At the top right-hand corner of your screen, you see the handle for this webinar. We're at Rotor Consult with the hashtag Virtual Teams. We will have some folks here tweeting real time, and we'd love to hear your comments as well. In addition to what you share in the Q&A panel, and we will be pausing in the middle of this webinar and at the end of this webinar for Q&A, we also encourage you to share your thoughts through Twitter. Greg from Toronto mentioned Agile, and I wanted to let you know that this is the last chance to register for tomorrow's Agile course. There are still 1 or 2 seats left. This one was just about sold out, and in fact, we were taking registrations right up until the cameras went live here for today's webinar. So if you are interested in learning more about Agile, this is a tremendously popular program. It's debuting tomorrow, and we welcome you to join us. I encourage you to do that as soon as we finish up here today. Finally, looking to next month's webinar. Next month, we will talk about buy-in. Now on the right-hand side of your screen, you see a poll that has opened up. And I will share the results of these polls when we come back a month from now and talk about earning buy-in in a project environment. So the question is, how many executive sponsors do you have on an average project? Is it 0? That does happen sometimes. Do you have 1 executive sponsor, 2 executive sponsors, or 3 or more? On the right-hand side, again, you will see the opportunity to select with the radio button one of those 4 options. The poll is now, if you're in the middle of filling it out, giving you one last opportunity to complete it. And it takes the WebEx system just a little bit of time to tabulate those results, and we will be sharing those results with you next month. Poll number 2. How many team members do you have on an average project? Now, I know this is difficult to answer with precision because some projects you might not have very many, other projects you might have quite a few. So think about your average project and think about others on your team, on the core team with you. Is it 0? Are you in a situation where you do the projects on your own? Is there at least 1 other person? So we're not counting you here. This does not count you. Are there 1 to 4 people in addition to yourself, 5 to 10 people in addition to yourself, or 11 or more people? And this poll is now giving you one last chance to enter in your answers. It's tabulating results. And in a moment here, we will go on to poll number 3. As soon as I click the slide on poll number 3, that poll will open up, and you'll have 30 seconds to give us your answer. All right, here we are, the final poll for next month's webinar. How many outside vendors do you work with on an average project? We're hearing more talk about outside vendors and integration with outside vendors and so on. We're curious how many of you work with outside vendors, or said differently, specific to this question here, how many outside vendors do you have? 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5 or more? And we are giving you one last opportunity here, if you're in the middle of entering your response, to do so. I hope you'll join us next month for earning buy-in. It's a hot topic in project management these days, and certainly one that we all have to deal with. Well, so we've talked about the past, we've talked about the future. Let's talk about today. Today is about virtual teams, and I'm very pleased to have with us right here in the studio, live, sitting across from me on the table at the Rotor Consulting corporate offices, Christine Zust. Christine Zust is a communication expert. In fact, Christine Zust just published her book, Everything I Do Positions Me, The Simple Path to Professional Success. Congratulations, Christine. Well done. Christine will be sharing with you her 30-plus years of experience. She's trained project managers across North America, working in the public and private sectors. And on a personal level, I can assure you that Christine is as good as they get. She is precise, she is expert, and she's very thoughtful in her comments. So listen to every word, pay attention. Please join me in welcoming Christine Zust.
Thank you very much, Trey. And I'd like to welcome everyone to our program today. It's wonderful to be with my friends from around the world. Let's begin with one more poll, and Trey warmed you up on completing some polls today. Here is your last and final poll today. It always helps me to understand where you are in your career. So please, with just a simple yes or no response, please answer this question. Are you currently managing a virtual team? And those results will be coming in shortly. It takes a moment, like Trey said, to share the results. And let's see what we have coming through.
So the poll has ended here in just a moment, and there we go. Here's your
Excellent.
results, Christine. 70% yes.
Those were the results that I was looking for. And I have to tell you that when we began developing our Managing Virtual Teams program, which you'll hear more about at the end of today's program, more than a year and a half ago, this wasn't necessarily the case, that there were a lot of people who were new to managing virtual teams. And we have asked the same question continuously so that we can stay on top of how many people truly are managing teams out there. I don't need to tell you that it is here to stay. Managing virtual teams, it's not a novelty. Most people today are finding that their companies and organizations are requesting them to work with virtual teams to save costs and time, and to also take advantage of a greater talent pool. So thank you so much for answering that question for me. Well, today's program is really designed around a number of challenges that we have found in the marketplace. And I always begin my Managing Virtual Teams program by asking people this question: what are the top challenges that are facing you today? And over the period of a year and a half, consistently, people are responding that these are their top 5 challenges. Cultural and language differences, lack of nonverbal cues to guide you in the communication process, time constraints and also time zone differences, the importance or the challenge of managing or monitoring behavior of your team members, and lastly, developing trust. These are the 5 challenges that we're going to be covering today. And what I'll be doing is, once the challenge is presented, then I'll be offering you some of our top tips from Rotor Consulting that come from our research and also from comments from project managers from around the world. So let's begin with challenge number 1. Cultural and language differences. Now, within the context of culture lies differences in norms, values, and societal structure within that culture. Within the context of language lies differences in communication style, the pronunciation of words, the translation and meaning of words, and of course, understanding accents when you're dealing with people from cultures not the same as yours. There are also positives and negatives. Let's talk about a negative. The greatest negative is that the diversity in culture and language can cause miscommunication, misunderstanding, confusion, and even frustration. The key to understanding is education, educating ourselves. Now, to me, the greatest positive of diverse work teams is just that, diversity itself. Because virtual work teams allow us to select any qualified or appropriate person from around the world to work on our project. This ensures a greater selection of qualified individuals from the talent pool. Another positive, as we get to know our international coworkers, we naturally expand our horizons beyond our own corner of the globe. I love international travel, and when I travel around the world, I embrace any new cultural experience that I can have. So how do we turn those negatives into positives? Through deepening our level of understanding. Now let me just share with you a simple example. And it comes back to me as a memory of my first English course in college. Was taught by Dr. Saeed, who emigrated to the United States from India. And I remember the first day that I sat in class, how I had difficulty understanding the pronunciation of some of his words. He was saying, it's very important. And I said, wary, wary. My translation, wary, in English means tired. I finally realized that he was pronouncing the V's as W's and W's as V's. Once I understood that, I thought, oh, he's saying very. Now, I come from Polish ancestry. My grandparents on both sides of my parents' families emigrated to the United States at the turn of the early 20th century. And in Poland, it's the same thing. We in America say vodka, and in Poland they say łatka. And it's those simple cultural differences, those simple language nuances, that we have to train our ear and become accustomed to those. So some quick tips on how to deal with cultural and language differences. First, it's all about getting acquainted. Invest the time up front from the very beginning of your team coming together to get acquainted with each other. It will pay back in volumes to you. And remember that very few project teams start and end with the same people on the project. You have people coming and going from project teams. Extend that same courtesy to any newcomers that you have throughout the project. Second, conduct research about team members' regions and countries and make sure that that information is being shared with the team. Pair up teams to get acquainted offline, outside of your meetings, and then allow them to build each other's profiles online and share them with the team for viewing. Next, and this is a great idea, if you know that you're having your standard status report meeting at the top of the hour, open up the phone lines 15 minutes early and invite people to come in together and have a personal conversation before the meeting begins. It's a great way to establish and maintain that camaraderie of your team. And last, take the time at each meeting to spotlight a different team member, to get acquainted with them and keep that conversation going. Now, I will ask you if you have any other ideas or tips that you would like to add that have worked for your team, for those of you who are a seasoned virtual team leader, just type the number 1 and your tip in the chat panel, and we'll be collecting these to share at a later date.
And that would be in your Q&A panel that you have open up.
The chat panel, or do we have the, oh, I'm
sorry,
the
chat
Q&A.
is not open for them, yeah.
Right.
So
Thank
the
you,
Q&A panel, technology.
Technology. Thank you for reminding me of that in the Q&A panel, which was highlighted early on in our conversation today.
And here come the number 1s and some comments. Wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much. And you can keep those comments coming. So challenge number 2 is a lack of nonverbal cues. Now, I cannot see you on a phone conference call. I'm missing 2/3 of that nonverbal message. And I must rely more on words, tone of voice, vocal nuances like pausing, silence, and breathing. The PMBOK, which comes from PMI, Project Management Institute, provides a basic communication model within its section on communication. And we know this basic communication model, that if I'm sending you a message and I'm the sender, I have to encode it using words, vocal inflection, my nonverbal language, everything I'm putting into that message that I'm sending to you. Your greatest responsibility on the receiving end is to decode that information. And to decode that information, which means that you have to read my nonverbal. You have to be mindful of the words that I'm using. And when you're sending a message back to me, the process begins again. You encode the message. I have to decode it on the receiving end. And it's like a tennis match, back and forth, back and forth. So the challenge, of course, is noise. For virtual team participants, we're handling noise, and oftentimes we don't even know that that noise exists. Internal noise can be any distractions that are happening here, the thoughts that we have that are going on. External noise is anything that's happening in the environment. Someone may be typing on their computer while a meeting is going on. There's something happening in the environment that's distracting you from that communication. And yes, we know there's a lot of multitasking that goes on in the virtual environment. The other consideration that's different for virtual teams is feedback. My greatest tip I can give you right now, if you're not getting feedback from your team, then ask for it. What a concept. Ask for that feedback. Listen to the language and the tone of voice of your participants. Be aware of the words that are used. What does silence mean? What does pausing mean in that culture? What words are being used to fill a sentence? And what attitude are you feeling that's coming to you from those individuals? Now, one of the most important ways that we communicate with each other nonverbally, in person or on a video screen, is through our facial expressions. And as you can see, we're capable of sharing more than 60 emotional expressions that come out of 6 primary emotions. And it happens through 100 muscles on our face. Isn't that amazing? Well, as you know, our facial expressions are lost when we can't see each other in person or through video conferencing. It means that it's more difficult for us to read those emotions. Most of the project leaders I'm talking to today are focusing on audio conference calls. Not everyone uses a platform that's as sophisticated as WebEx, which is the platform that we're using today, which allows you to see my face and Trey's face as we're presenting to you today. So it means that we have to work very hard on reading a person's emotions. So we have to ask for feedback. It requires us to listen more carefully. Now, if you're talking to someone on your call who could be halfway across the country or halfway around the world, you have to ask some clarifying questions if you're uncertain at all. When we're asking for feedback, we always want to use the person's name first. So I would say, Brad, you hesitated in your response. Is there any concern that you're experiencing? That's a clarifying question that I'm asking Brad, because all too often I can try to interpret Brad's silence, and it could mean something totally different. You're extending a common courtesy to Brad by using his name first, instead of catching him off guard. When you catch him off guard, you'd say, you hesitated in your response, Brad, and then all of a sudden Brad's thinking, oh, I didn't hear what she just said. So it's a common courtesy just to use the person's name first. Here are some quick tips for you on not having the luxury always of the nonverbal cues in the virtual environment. Practice active listening skills. Now, in our online communication program, we dig much deeper into active listening skills. I will tell you quite simply, the philosophy behind active listening is being fully aware and fully present in the moment. You have no distractions. Next, listen very carefully to the tone of voice, pausing, silence. how the person is breathing. Are you sensing any tension or relaxation? Are they in a good mood or a bad mood? We can sense that through a person's vocal quality. Know and understand that silence can mean something different for different communication styles. An analytical person, for instance, could still be processing information. Someone who is a more direct communicator may have nothing to add, and that person may be ready to move on. I'll also add that silence means something different in different cultures. I know in my experience in traveling throughout Asia, silence is revered. Here in America, we feel compelled to fill every single second with sound. So it's a nuance that we need to understand. Use a variety of feedback mechanisms. You have so much to choose from in the electronic environment that helps you get to know and read people. We have chat panels or Q&A panels when we're engaged in a platform like WebEx and others, instant messaging. The most important, I believe, is following up offline with people, really getting to know them outside of that meeting environment. Now, Trey had mentioned at the beginning of our program that we'd be taking questions. Now, before we get into that, again, we want to welcome some of your tips and techniques that have worked for you. Since we're on challenge number 2, for those of you who would love to share your tips with us, please type in a number 2 and any tip or technique that has worked for you. Thank you.
All right, fantastic, Christine. We have a lot of activity here on the Q&A line. First, I'd like to go to Carl, who had a response to the beginning conversation on how to deal with that executive sponsor that is pushing for requirements before the planning is complete. Carl recommends, as a project manager, you can use risk management to help control these changes. I had a project, Carl goes on to say, that did not have the requirements defined, so I ran a risk analysis. The risk was too high for management to accept, not defining the requirements. We have, I'm just going to highlight a few of the number 1 responses that we received here in terms of your tips on how to understand cultural differences. Paula says have a yearly in-person meeting. Research does show in-person is the most effective way to build rapport and relationships. Victoria suggests take the time to celebrate other national holidays in the office and use that as a springboard to learn more about their culture. Kostas encourages all of us to learn foreign languages. Tom says identify company holidays for each location, and Richard says, as did a number of you, some aspect of preparing bios with photos to distribute them from the team. Dwayne, hello Dwayne, I recognize you from our courses, recommends if other culture is having a holiday, I ask about it and want to know what it means and how they intend to celebrate the holiday. Let's go to some of your questions. Deborah asks, what's the best way to get acquainted with virtual teams? So what's the best way for everyone to get to know each other, Christine, when they've decided to meet as a virtual team?
Well, there are so many ideas for getting acquainted, and the key is, number 1, to get acquainted. And when you're working in the virtual environment where, let's say, you don't have the luxury of ever meeting face-to-face, let's say that your company doesn't allow expenses like that in the budget, and you must get to know each other only in the virtual environment. Through my conversations with project managers, they say from the very beginning, find out as much information as you can about each other as you come into that first meeting. Even before people get into that first meeting, you can electronically share information, brief bios with photos that has already been recommended. And I would say, just as human beings, now let's take our professional work environment out of the picture just for a moment. We're all human beings. We all have similar needs and desires as inhabitants of this planet called Earth. And so we want to remember that the best way to get to know an individual, especially in the virtual environment, is to open up that dialogue as the project leader to allow your team to get to know each other as people. What do people like to do? What are their hobbies, their interests? And any personal information that you can find out about each other is helpful as you go through this project management together.
Thank you. Carlos would like to know if you think video conferencing, such as what we're doing right now, where you have the audio and the live streaming video, does video conferencing help with nonverbals and improve communications?
It's a yes and no response. I would say yes for some people who are visual learners. They love to have that visual anchor of being able to see you on the screen. For some people, they find that video can be distracting, especially for audio learners. They would much rather hear your voice. It's distracting for them to see me, to see anyone on screen. So it's really a matter of personal preference that visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learners, as you know, we all learn in a different way. And try to find out from the people working on your team what their preference is, if they prefer that visual or audio connection.
That is a great point, Christine. As you share that story, I think of our experience with online live training here at Rotor Consulting. For our online live courses, such as the Virtual Teams 8PDU course, we have live streaming video. And most students find that to be an added value. They feel closer to the instructor. They feel like it's more intimate. We can talk to each other. They can see the instructor. But there are some students who do, to your point, find video to be distracting. So for those folks, we show them how to turn off the video, and then they can listen. And for others, they can read the slides and capture their learning that way. Fascinating. One more question from Jennifer, and then we'll move on to the second half, and we will have one more Q&A at the end. Jennifer would like to know how to deal with work ethic differences. So if you have one culture where people are accustomed to working very late hours, and another culture where people are accustomed to working shorter hours or perhaps taking longer lunches but working later in the evening, how might one think about how to navigate some of those differences in customary hours for work?
Well, number one is if you have, or I shouldn't say if you have, when you have an open dialogue on a topic such as this, and I would recommend it right from the very beginning, to see if there are some of those differences among your team members around the world. Finding out days of the week that people are accustomed to working, because not every country around the world works on Fridays, for instance. We're accustomed to it here in America. So having that conversation to find out what those differences are. And I'll be chatting in one of my next slides just about how we can adapt to other people's work styles, not just always looking at it from our perspective as the leader, but being much more inclusive and keeping that in mind as we work with other individuals from other cultures. So are we ready to move on?
We are ready to move on. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Yes, and for those we didn't get to, we'll have one more Q&A, and again, we will be going to the Rotor Consulting LinkedIn group to continue the conversation when we finish up here in about 25 minutes. Back to you, Christine, for part two.
Thank you, Trey. Challenge number 3, time constraints and time zone differences. As you know, working within the context of different time zones, which is asynchronous, and different places, which is remote locations, creates tremendous challenges for the virtual work team, especially for the international virtual team leader. Some simple tips that I will offer to you. Number 1, know that your agenda is your friend when dealing with time constraints. Oftentimes, we only meet in short periods of time, 15, 20-minute status report meetings. So use that agenda to your advantage to stay on track. And remind people that you only have a certain amount of time. Remind them again toward the end of the call, we only have 5 minutes left. We have 2 agenda items to go through. That's your responsibility of being a facilitator. Next, assign agenda report outs in advance. If you want people to come prepared to the meeting to speak specifically relating to that status of that project, then let them know that in advance. Every project manager I've talked to says that they like to set up a time frame for when their agenda is sent out. It could be a day in advance, 2 days in advance. It could be 2 hours in advance of a meeting. That becomes part of your ground rules when you're setting up your teams. Here, to your point that was just asked of me, consider all team members' time zones when you're scheduling meetings, not just your time zone. And last, as a follow-up to that, think of ways that you can alter times of your meetings so that you can accommodate all team members, so that there aren't 1 or 2 team members or a handful of members who are constantly staying up till the wee hours near midnight their time, or they have to wake up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning their time. Alter those times because it's a sign of courtesy to you, and your team members will respect you for that. So here we go again, number 3. Any additional tips that you would like to share in the Q&A panel, just write the number 3, and anything that has worked very well for you, and we'll capture those. Thank you.
You have, Christine, anticipated a question from Sharad, who asked, how do we effectively manage the time zone differences? So we're all aligned here.
We're in line. Excellent. So challenge number 4, monitoring behavior. How do you do that when you have people in remote locations that you oftentimes can't see? It's difficult to do because we're not in the same room with them. We can't see what they're doing. We can't read their body language. We can't monitor their eye behavior. Here are some of our best tips for you. Co-create. I'm going to say that word again. Co-create and establish rules for engagement. That means get your team involved in how they're going to work together. Your team will be much more successful. And those rules of engagement, or what we also call ground rules, could be something as simple as everyone comes to a meeting on time. Everybody has an opportunity to contribute equally, which means that no one dominates the conversation. Those are simple rules of engagement. Next, if you have several members who are located in another remote location, you could appoint a remote meeting leader, someone who can keep that other group focused while you're trying to manage the meeting. Connect with team members on an ongoing basis offline, in conversations and any interactions that will keep them engaged. These are very important for you to monitor their behavior during your calls. Now, if you have any tips on monitoring behavior, type those in the Q&A panel with the number 4 first, and again, we will collect those. Now for our last challenge, then we have another question and answer opportunity and then some closing comments. Challenge number 5, developing trust with a virtual team. You know that trust is really at the heart of all human relationships. Let me repeat that. Let me insert another word. All successful human relationships are centered around trust. It's also at the heart of all teams, all productive work teams, whether they are virtual or co-located. As I said earlier, I can't see you in the virtual environment. How am I going to know if I can trust you to get the job done? Well, in their book entitled Trust in Organizations, chapter authors Meyerson, White, and Kramer coined this phrase that you're seeing on the screen right now called swift trust. Because of the nature of virtual teams, which means you're operating within a limited time frame, It requires team members to act more swiftly as if trust already existed, rather than waiting to see if they can or cannot trust someone, hence the name Swift Trust. When we think about trust in face-to-face relationships, and think about the work environment, I have multiple opportunities to see you in my work environment when we're in the same physical location. I can see you in the cafeteria, passing in the hallway. I can see you at other department or divisional meetings. So I have many opportunities to see you in action. I don't have that same opportunity in the virtual environment. Now, other research suggests that the virtual team's trust builds by doing rather than by relating. And that normal face-to-face trust relationship is built by me relating to you. In the virtual environment, it's more important that I see you. Well, I use that term, see you. To experience would be a better choice of words, to experience you in action virtually. Now, we do spend more time on this topic in Rotor Consulting's 8-hour online program, Managing Virtual Teams, which we'll talk about later today. How do we develop that trust? Here are some of our top tips that we can offer to you in our limited amount of time together today. And this was mentioned already earlier by one of our participants. If you can, host a face-to-face kickoff meeting. If your company can afford to do it, research has shown that it makes a team much more productive and that trust is established early on, whether you're in a virtual or a face-to-face platform like WebEx or Skype. Create those ongoing opportunities for team members to get acquainted. I can't emphasize this enough. Providing information on their work as well as their personal interests. We all know that when team members come together on a project for the first time, there is a high level of uncertainty and oftentimes anxiety because people don't yet know what their roles are or their responsibilities or what the processes are that are going to be used or the methodology. Clarifying those roles is one way, and clearly clarifying those roles is one way that you can establish that trust from the beginning. If you feel comfortable with this, and I know that there are many project leaders who feel comfortable with it and other people don't feel comfortable with it, whatever works for you, if you can and you're interested, rotate the meeting leadership role, either part of it or all of it when it's appropriate. Because what that does is it creates that sense of unity among your team, that you're taking turns, that you have bought into this project together, that each and every one of you in your own way is providing leadership to the project. Even if they are not the true project leader, they can still be a meeting leader and meeting facilitator. And I did it again. Number 5 in your Q&A, question and answer panel. Any tips that you have that you would like to share on developing trust? Of course, we welcome those right now. Now, before we take our final question and answer period, I wanted to leave you with some final thoughts. What keeps a virtual team engaged? Now, we've talked about 5 top challenges, and I've provided you with some tips today. Number 1, every team member wants to feel that the time that they spend in meetings is time well spent. Remember that agendas are your friends. They allow you to be a productive team leader and excellent facilitator. Focus on outcomes. That means keeping the team engaged on where things stand with deliverables, what has been accomplished, what has been achieved. Is there anything else that you need to be doing? Inclusiveness. I can't emphasize this enough. That you are the leader, reminding your team members that all ideas and comments will be recognized and valued. There's nothing that makes a person feel smaller or less significant than when someone completely dismisses their thoughts and ideas and opinions. And that's where you can play a role as leader. That everyone is abiding by the same ground rules that, as I mentioned earlier, are co-created by your team. This is a very important one for me, mutual respect and trust. And where does that begin? It begins with you as the team leader. By leading by example, when you trust and respect the people on your team, they will trust and respect you in return and each other. And last, remember that those offline conversations and interactions allow you to be much more productive one-on-one with your team members. Think about how you create a feeling of satisfaction, accomplishment, engagement for your virtual team. Are you doing all the right things? Could you do more? What else would you like to add to this list? And you don't need any numbers or anything, because we'll know that this is all about engagement, keeping that virtual team engaged. And right now we are ready to go into our final question and answer session.
Fantastic. We are getting a lot of discussion here on the Q&A panel.
Oh, good.
Here's some of the feedback you've received in terms of tips. Antonio, and this is to number 2, says, in my experience, drawing out concerns by gently asking questions encourages people to come out and voice out concerns. And Antonio explains that he has used this in facilitating entire meetings. Peggy says when working in opposite time zones, she does alternate times of the meeting, so it isn't always night or morning for the same group. To number 3, Rhonda says it's helpful to talk about times in the client's time zone. So great way, thank you, Rhonda, to get yourself into the other person's perspective. So when you're talking about times, she talks about them in terms of the other party's time zone. Victoria, for number 4, says, I try to make sure that everyone on the call has a chance to speak. If someone is very quiet, I'll often solicit their input to make sure they're paying attention. So lots of great comments, and I do have to share with you a comment from Ben. He said, so does this mean that Rotor's monthly webinars will vary starting times to accommodate your worldwide participants? You know, it's a great comment, Ben. We did polling on this and found that this 11 a.m. time was the time that was best for the majority, but certainly not for all, and we are looking into some other options to make this more accessible to all folks. We do also record these webinars and make them available as archived webinars on our website. Thank you for the comment, Ben. Let's go to some questions now. Now, Patricia brought up the cultural differences in how females are viewed. And specifically, Patricia said, as a female project manager, I run into cultures where women are not readily accepted in management roles. How can I get the cooperation and gain respect in this situation?
Well, and I would say look at the culture that you're dealing with. And one of the best books that I can recommend that you read on the topic of getting to know any culture is called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands by Conaway et al. The title of that again is Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And it helps us understand how to deal with 60 cultures around the world. And I have found it very helpful to me on my international travels. I know what my boundaries are as a woman when I'm dealing within certain cultures, and it's important for us to respect those cultures. And some cultures, I must say, some cultures have made tremendous strides. I participated in a trade mission to Japan in 1993. Well, that's almost 20 years ago. Things are very different now for women who are working in Japan and with the Japanese. We do see some of those changes. Not all countries around the world embrace that kind of change. And I would say the better acquainted that you can get with the specific countries that you are dealing with to know what does it mean as a woman to work in that country. Number one tip that I would have with respect to that is to respect what those cultural norms are and know that oftentimes we must, as women, play our role in society and in culture in order to still get things done the way that we want to. We may need the help or the assistance of some of our male counterparts until that level of trust and respect in us comes toward us. And again, it really depends on the country that you're dealing in. Thank you for that question. Great, great question.
Thank you, Christine. And since we do have so many people on this call from different countries, if you are a female in a foreign culture and have some tips on what you've done, we certainly welcome those comments.
Great.
Now, you mentioned one book, Kiss, Bow, and Shake Hands. Are there any other resources, Christine, that you would recommend people look at?
Well, you know, because we live in this wonderful virtual environment, that we have access to so much resources using the internet, that something even as simple as, and I apologize for not having the website memorized, but even visiting the United Nations website, we often forget the value that organization can provide to us. And what I found of value when I did research looking at the United Nations website is that it helps us to understand from a perspective of myself being a United States citizen, it helps me to understand what countries around the world America is friendly with, who are our allies, and other countries where we need to know that if there are issues, it's a helpful thing to understand that before working on a project. And that's the kind of information that comes from a website like the United Nations.
Let's take one last question here from Ravi Kumar. Ravi Kumar asks, even though as a manager, if we trust on the team members, if they don't trust us, how to build it? So, in other words, if Ravi Kumar is trusting his team, but he's having a hard time getting that trust back from the team, what tips do you have, Christine, in a virtual environment on how he and others in that situation can build trust?
I would say my greatest tip would be to take some of those conversations offline. I recommend to project managers, especially in the virtual work environment, because you cannot always see what that body language says to you, that by isolating that person in a one-on-one conversation and taking the time and investing and getting to know each other, asking some of those questions, clarifying questions. For instance, let's say if there's someone who you may start thinking, I don't trust that person, or did they not trust me? Have a conversation and say, I really wanted us to spend some time together because I'm not quite yet understanding your perspective on things. And let's have a conversation about that. And open up the conversation, and people will respect you, trust you more as a leader. And I can almost guarantee that by investing that time in one-on-one conversations with people on your team, it will pay dividends further down the line in their project performance.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. Let's move on to your closing comments, closing thoughts of the day on the topic of virtual teams.
Well, we began our brief time together today, less than an hour, talking about the top 5 challenges that project managers face. Everything from cultural and language differences down to developing trust. And I want to thank you for allowing us at Rotor Consulting to share this time with you, to share our comments and our knowledge with you on this topic of managing virtual teams. And I'd also like to personally thank each and every one of you for being with us, and for those of you who participated in providing some additional tips with us and asking questions. It really helps us to understand what's on your mind, and we believe that it adds tremendous value to everyone who's on the call today and also on the recorded version. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, Christine, thank you. We appreciate your expertise and knowledge, and I suspect that there's some folks who are going to be interested in your book. Here it is, Everything I Do Positions Me. Here you see the wonderful cover designed by Mark, Christine's husband. So for anyone interested in this book, Christine, what's the best way for them to get a copy? Would they email you at the Rotor Consulting email address? Is that the best way for them?
That is a perfect way to communicate with me. And it is Zust_Christine@rotorconsulting.com. And thank you for offering that, Trey.
My pleasure, and we'll type it into the Q&A panel. Nathan, if you could send that to all folks through the Q&A panel, please, that would be super helpful.
I sure can.
Thank you, sir. All right, you heard Christine mention her upcoming course. This starts on August 21st. The course is on managing virtual teams in depth, what we discussed today. This is an 8-hour course. It's highly interactive. It's on a similar format that we're using right here. There's live streaming video, but we turn on your microphones. We limit the attendance to these courses to keep them small and intimate, and this is a new course. It was just developed this year as more and more of us find ourselves working in virtual teams. And like all of our programs, this is certified for professional development units, 8 PDUs, through the Project Management Institute. Next month, we will be talking about buy-in. How do we get others to approve our plans, agree with our plans, take actions on what we'd like to have happen? We'll be here at 11 a.m. Eastern, August 14th. I encourage you to sign up right away. These webinars have become very popular, and we're humbled by that. They're selling out typically a week or two, in some cases even more before the event. We do run a wait list. We do our best to let people on who are waitlisted, but they are capped at 1,000 folks. So I encourage all of you, when you leave the webinar today, if you're available and interested in August 14th, to go ahead and register. If you do happen to miss one of the webinars, we record them and we have them available for purchase. These go back about 1.5 years. We've been doing these webinars for over 2 years now, but we didn't start recording in the early days. There's all kinds of things, from project planning to improvisation to project negotiation. A great way to keep yourself abreast of the latest developments in project management and earn some PDUs in the process. In addition to our full portfolio of online programs, we will be in the eastern United States and Denver in the next month or two for in-person programs as well. You can find us in Boston, Charlotte, Miami, and Denver in the next 2 months for in-person programs. In closing, I would like to recognize Mr. Lee Lambert, who has just announced his retirement. Lee Lambert is a PMI fellow. He spent some 4 decades project management consulting and project management training. He was one of the early creators of the PMP test. He's really been a thought leader for our industry, and we certainly wish him all the best. He's worked hard. He's traveled a lot. For those of us who are road warriors, you understand that there just comes a time when the trade-offs of the travel aren't worth it anymore. He's just really been a powerhouse in our industry, and we'd like to extend our warm wishes to Lee Lambert and wishes that he enjoys his retirement. That brings us to a close here today. The link on the bottom of your screen here, rotorconsulting.com/postwebinar.php, is where you can go to get the PDU form. You can download today's presentation. You can sign up for next month's webinar. You will also be receiving, since you are on this webinar, an automated email from WebEx with that same web address. Again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you all the best for project success. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude today's webinar. We would like to thank you once again for your time today, and you may now disconnect.